Good morning, Sultan.
Good
Nice
morning.
to be sitting here with you this morning once again.
Thank you, Anita.
So I'd like to talk a little bit with you today about the new buzzwords in our industry called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a person in your position at Open Door, I'm just wondering, what does diversity, inclusion, and equity mean for you?
In my position or any other position, first of all, this is not a new word, but it means like the society, the organization will thrive when people value diverse group of people. In Open Door Society, we have employees working, they were born in 40 different countries. So that's a small, many kind of, we call it a small United Nations. So that is helping the organization to thrive and be better day by day.
Well, yeah, you've mentioned that the words are not new, and actually they were started in 1996 by Mustafa Özbilgin, who started off with three words that he was going to research: equality, diversity, and inclusion. And he's been studying this topic in terms of organizational theories for about 25 years now. And so, yeah, it's come a long way, but some of the words have changed. But nevertheless, I'm just wondering, about how he uses that as a table metaphor. He says that, for example, people can come together around a table and they may be diverse, but then it depends on who's doing the talking at the table. And so in order to bring in inclusion, he likens it to everybody bringing something to the table and everybody taking something away. Nobody's serving or eating without the other. And then he says that overall idea means inclusion and equity. So that's his take on it. But hasn't that concept, maybe not with those words, hasn't that been around for millennia, Sultan, especially in your culture and maybe mine too?
It has. It has been for at least 1,000 years. That if you go back to literature and looking at some books, I would share a couple poem. But
Please.
before sharing the poem, I would say that there is one time, I think Rumi, which is probably 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago, he was in 1200 in his time. He mentioned that the world is like a house for all human beings. He talked about that, are we in that house, are we a host or a guest? So that is something, if you're going, that's the time, in his time, he was just moving around, so there was not much about borders or asking passport or anything like that.
But he was from Bakht
in
Afghanistan,
he was
right?
born in Balkh province. He went to Nishapur, then he went to Baghdad, then he went to Rum. That's why I call him Rumi. Then he ended up in Turkey, today's
Konya.
Turkey and Konya, and that's what the whole world for him. It was just, the world was the house for all human beings, so he should not have had any borders. He could cross anywhere. But the poem that I would share,
please,
that is, I will share it in Dari, Farsi, which is the Dari of the language of Afghanistan.
Okay.
Baza, aranchi hasti baza. Gar kafir و گبر و بت پرستی بازا. این درگه ما درگه ناامیدی نیست. این درگه ما درگه ناامیدی نیست. 100 بار اگر تو بشکستی بازا. If you translate it literally to English, it says, come, come. Whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of living, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan or a house of despair. Come. Even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come. Yet again come and come. So it wasn't.
I know that. I've seen it on the mosque in Konya, and I read it. It was one of the first things I read when I went to Turkey.
There's a little bit of debate who said this poem first, but it's attributed to Rumi. Some people think it is said by Sheikh Abu Said Abu Khair, which was 100 years. He died 100 years before Rumi was born. But then people think it is Rumi who said it. It's a little bit debate in that part. But there's another poem from Shah Nasser Khusro that he was born also in Afghanistan in 1004. He says this poem that در آن بستان که گل با خارها امرستند آن در آن بستان که گل با خارها امرستند خار و گل یکسان شمر کن هر دو در باستان توست. On the field or in the garden where the thorn and flowers are growing similarly together, you should value them equally because they are in your garden.
Yeah.
So when you look at all of these pieces from thousands of years ago, that people, how they will looked at inclusion, diversity, and equity, they were just did not see any differences. They were just welcoming all race and all different group of people.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There is so much to learn from that. It's a philosophy for life, actually, from millennia ago, from your culture, our culture, and what we can use today. And it's so expressive, so poetic, and it seems to be in the spirit of our peoples. And it's beautiful.
I would share one more thing from this new guy, like the guy, I think he's a contemporary, Muhammad Mukhtarzadeh. He's from Iran. He was born in 1980s. He's contemporary poet. It says about باران که شدی مپرس این خانه کیست باران که شدی مپرس این خانه کیست سقف حرم و کعبه و میخانه یکیست. When you're pouring like rain, you should not think whose house you're pouring into, because the rooftop of Kaaba and the bar, it's all the same. Because he's a Muslim, he was born in Iran, he's still in Iran, I think, but he's just referring from his perspective, because he's saying that when every human being, we're a drop of rain, we're just in the sea of humanity.
Yeah.
We're a soul in this, like every pieces of human, we're one soul in the sea of the souls. So we should not see the differences. When you're pouring like rain, you should not differentiate where you're falling.
So the rain falls on
The
everyone's
rain falls
house.
on everyone's house equally. If it is house or a bar, or a makkah.
Beautiful words of wisdom, truly, that your culture brings with you here. And it would be so nice that people understand that and understand that wisdom that people bring. Yeah. I was just going to mention a brief poem, if I could, also from Nazim Hikmet, who also uses a metaphor of nature. And I'll just briefly recite it. Yaşamak bir ağaç gibidir. Tek ve hür. Ve bir orman gibi kardeşçesine. Bu bizim hasret. And that means basically to live like a tree, independent and free, but like a forest together in brotherhood and sisterhood. Although they don't use brotherhood and sisterhood. Kardeşçin. Yeah, kardeş, you know the word. This is our yearning.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's again beautiful because it's everyone together. You're both a separate tree, but you're part of the forest.
Yeah.
And that's that multiplicity and togetherness that comes from our cultures. And it's so rich. I find it expressive. And in many ways, when you say diversity, equity, and inclusion, it sounds very institutional, kind of dry, but static. But if we could bring more art and poetry and more discussion, we could make it live through how we express ourselves.
That's true. When you look at the poems that I shared, like from 1050, which was Shana Sarkisro said it, and to today, the one that was said by this guy who was born in 1980s, like probably his poem was said sometime in 2003, 2004. So the history of that region, or that could be similar to most of other regions that we are not familiar, but the diversity, inclusion, and equity have been there for these thousands of years.
Yes.
It's not something new phenomenon. Maybe just we reworded it differently.
Yes, and it keeps being reworded, and like in the words of Nazim Hikmet, of how to live. Can I share an experience of what I lived in Turkey?
Sure.
Very briefly, because it's really important to show how that happens in real life, right? So I went to a wedding once. I think it was on the Black Sea. And there was a large group of people. We were all dancing and singing and all the pop music dancing and too and so on. And by the end of the night, everybody got a little bit quiet, but they went off all together, all of us, into sort of a corner
Circle.
space.
Yeah.
And each person sang their folk song from their province or region that they come from in Turkey. And each sang one after the other. And sometimes a little tear would form. And you knew it was so rich and emotional. Everybody gave space for each to sing in the way they wanted. And then they came to me, and they never excluded me. They said, "And what's your song?" And so I sung them a song from Terry Jacks. Actually, he's from Winnipeg a long time ago, a 1974 song called Seasons in the Sun. It's taken from a Belgian songwriter and singer, Jacques Brel. And it goes something like this, and it's kind of sad, but goodbye, my friend, it's hard to die when all the birds are singing in the sky. Now that the spring is in the air, Pretty flowers everywhere, think of me and I'll be there. Da, 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 and it goes on like that. So it brings back nature, flowers, spring, rebirth, and they let me sing it in my language. And we all cried together. And it's a memory I'll always keep of the real living togetherness of our peoples. And so that's my experience I wanted to share.
It kind of crossed my mind. I have the similar story. I was invited one time through, it was a training for Turtle Island in Regina. We learned about the history, timeline of Aboriginals in Canada, went back to 1500s and came to 2013 that I was in that training. We went to Sweat into this ceremony of Sweat Lodge in Payapot Reserve. It was a tough time, but it was because when you're first time going to Sweat, it's so hot, you never experienced. But the second round, they asked all of us to take turn and do prayers with the drum. It was the most beautiful scene or most beautiful moment because we had 8 or 10 people from very diverse backgrounds. So we each took a minute to pray in our own language, in our own method, in a way, because that's a similar circle.
Yeah.
Being in a Sweat and then sharing your own prayers, because all prayers are just the same but in different languages.
Yeah.
So that was the beauty
That's
that
right.
I had that experience with the Aboriginal community.
Lovely.
And the group of people with us in the training in Payapot Reserve.
Beautiful. So that's a nice across time and space. Similar memory we share with different means. We weren't sweating because of the Sweat Lodge. We were sweating from dancing, but that's another
No,
story.
we were sweating.
Well, so to return to the metaphor that Mustafa Özbilgin used about the table, I think that maybe our threads is a kind of circle, a kind of expression, a kind of space that's still organic, that hasn't become institutionalized. And when we take our time across these 2 days to listen to each other and those stories, we'll think of how they weave together as threads, like
That's
our
right, yeah.
experiences. And that's the beauty of threads, I think, and of sharing and not having silos. Everybody being included and represented and free to speak, like Nazim Hikmet called for.
It is an opportunity that brings everyone together and stitch them together with the threads.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sultan, and thank you for sharing these moments
Well,
with
thank
me
you for
today.
inviting me to
Great
be here.
discussion.
Thanks a lot.